Hello, my name is Luella Cook, and I will be discussing budgeting and managing fiscal resources. First, what is budgeting and why is it important? Budgeting is defined by the textbook as the process of planning and working to meet or exceed goals of the plan. Budgeting allows for goals to be made, goals to be met, and performances to be evaluated. Budgeting and financial management is primarily a nurse manager's responsibility, but nursing and ancillary staff can be a large influence on its success. Budgeting is necessary to run a nursing unit because it allows for the manager to see what can and cannot be afforded. And it is also a way that the nurse manager can be held accountable to the executive management. In this presentation, I will discuss different budgeting strategies and ways to evaluate the budget, as well as factors influencing the budget. Like with most processes, planning is the central idea behind budgeting. First, the nurse manager should review the goals and objectives for their department or unit. Then there should be a review of past budgets. This should look at hospital census, staffing, previous year's revenues, any information that may give the nurse manager an idea of approximately how much money they could be made or spent in a given year. Of course, these numbers won't be exactly the same. Yearly raises and price increases with normal inflation are inevitable, but looking back is a great way to see patterns and get a great starting point. This process does take time to complete. To create an annual fiscal plan, it should take approximately 3 to 6 months. This process is led by the nurse manager, who creates a department or a unit budget and then sends it to higher levels of management for review. Final approval is given by a governing board, such as a board of directors or shareholders. It should also be mentioned that nurse managers should consult their staff when creating a budget, as they may be able to better predict what resources they may need. Also, involving staff in this process brings awareness to the fiscal goals and the facilities, and it facilitates staff to buy in or increase the likelihood that these goals will be met. First approach to budgeting is incremental budgeting. This is the traditional way to budget in which the financial department hands out a budgeting spreadsheet that has every single expense item or category listed. You then go line by line and see what the predicted spending was compared to the actual spending of the year. This gives a good idea of if a budget amount should be increased, decreased, or stay relatively the same for the next year's budget. Positive for this approach is that it's simple, but the negative is that it doesn't always discover cost discrepancies. Oftentimes, managers will spend the entire expected budget each year to ensure that they have those base funds for the next year. The next approach is zero-based budgeting. This approach eliminates that lack of cost efficiency found in incremental budgeting. In this strategy, the base funds for the upcoming year is zero, and the manager must justify every expense, even for established ones. This is a time-consuming task, so often it's not done every year. Maybe done every few years, or it might be modified so that managers only have to justify spending above 80% of the current expenses, just to save some time. Fixed or variable budgets. These are categorized budgets that are pretty self-explanatory. Fixed budgets do not increase or decrease, while variable budgets do change based on changes in revenue, patient census, and supplies. The operating budget is also known as the annual budget. It consists of both revenue and expenses. Basically, revenue is income received from patient care. This can be collected through Medicare, bundled payments such as total joint replacements, negotiated rates through insurance companies or discounts given to cash payers such as the Amish. There's also a reimbursement method called capitation, which is one rate per member per month, no matter the service. This is also used by insurance companies. The expense budget is basically spending, and it can be divided into two categories: salary and non-salary expenses. Within these categories, costs are classified as fixed or variable, and direct or indirect. Fixed and variable costs are similar to fixed and variable budgeting in that fixed costs do not change. They are things such as rental payments or insurance premiums. And variable costs are dependent on external factors, such as patient census and supply costs. Direct costs are associated with direct patient care, such as nursing salaries. And indirect costs are those that are needed for function but do not necessarily impact care directly, such as salary for maintenance staff. Salary budgets pay for staff wages. This includes nurses and support staff. It also includes expenses related to employee benefits, like paid time off, overtime, shift differentials, annual raises, bonuses, and staff training. For staff salary budgets, it is important to calculate FTE budgets. This is for the base salary budget as well as the FTE required for replacement. This basically means that your staff can go on vacation and call out sick, and the unit will still be adequately staffed. This can be found by using a formula in which you divide total replacement time by annual FTE time. An example of salary budgeting in real life that I found was the article by Ponte, Germain, and Moulton. A hospital in Michigan surveyed their nurse managers about their strengths and weaknesses. They found that many wanted to improve financial management skills, specifically their salary budgeting. They did some investigating, and they found that they had annual budgets based on current FTEs, but they had no predicted census volumes or benchmarks. They also utilized position control, but they hadn't updated it, and they had no staff plans. So they educated the nurse managers on utilizing previous historic data, looking at hospital census volumes and what kind of staffing was needed to kind of predict what would be needed for the upcoming year. They also encouraged them to utilize position control to its fullest extent. Position control is a budget monitoring tool. It's used to compare actual number of employees to the budgeted FTE. If that's not updated with new employees, then it kind of becomes obsolete and doesn't really help anyone. So it's really important to stay up to date with that. And then finally, non-salary budget includes patient care supplies, maintenance costs for the unit, any equipment, and any rental fees. The capital budget is usually determined at an organizational level. This budget is designed to meet long-term financial goals and includes things such as renovations, construction, and upgrading equipment. Anything that is long-term or above a certain predetermined dollar amount must come out of the capital budget. Capital budgets are limited, so projects and spending must be prioritized, but are ultimately investments back into the organization. Monitoring and controlling budgetary performance. Monthly reports to compare estimated budgets with actual expenses. This helps to keep budgeting manageable. The more frequently you assess the status of your budget, the easier it will be to know where you stand, and the less time it will take you to discover that. Variance and variance analysis. So in variance analysis, discrepancies of certain amounts must be identified and explained. They may also discover some patterns, such as maybe in the winter you don't have as high of census or you have lower revenues. It also can discover favorable versus unfavorable variances. A favorable variance is anytime you have higher revenues than expected or lower spending than expected. And then the opposite way, an unfavorable variance would be higher expenditures and lower revenues than expected. So Galway discussed strategies that nursing leaders should employ in order to manage unit finances. They said, quote, nursing leaders must be proactive about change, and they must frequently review the financial status of their department or their programs. So the first way that they encourage nurse managers and nurse leadership to engage in financial management is to identify their resources. What do you need to get your job done? Think about your environmental needs, like your physical space. Do you need air conditioning, electric? Your equipment needs? Any training supplies, like CPR, like mannequins? Technology, such as computers to do charting on? And then just general office needs. Also consider your personnel needs, education and training. These are reinvestments back into your organization, and it also increases your personnel's satisfaction with where they work. They also want you to understand organizational cultures and levels of authority. Know the procedure for the budget setting. Capital and contingency budgets are usually organizational wide. Who do you go to communicate what you need? And who will communicate with you if something is approved or not approved? Planning and executing budget process. Remember, educating your staff and having staff training is a return on your investment. It decreases turnover, increases satisfaction for the patients and the staff. Staff impact on budgeting. Performance improvement. Managers educate staff on the need for accurate and timely documentation. This is so essential for reimbursement, especially through Medicaid, Medicare, and insurance companies. This documentation should be accurate and timely. Another strategy is to have incentive programs to maintain high-performing staff. It helps to retain staff and is needed to maintain a budget. As discussed earlier, when staff is aware of costs and budgets, they are more likely to work in ways that meet that goal, especially when bonuses are given based on net gains. This empowerment of staff nurses to help promote the budget and stick to it is an ideology associated with magnet hospitals. And it can also be related to managing resources. The nursing staff is ultimately most responsible for the use of the resources. They're the ones that use most of the equipment for the patients, like linens and syringes and those basic patient care equipment. So if they're more aware of what the financial goals are and the impacts that it has not only on the organization, but for them as well, it can result in less waste and less potential damage to expensive equipment that could be very costly. And lastly, patient care. Having quality professional and therapeutic relationships with patients helps to produce better patient outcomes, resulting in higher levels of reimbursement and also recommendations so that we get more patients. It also allows for a more intimate view of what your patient population needs. And then this equips the manager to make more accurate financial and budgeting decisions. An example of staff impact that I found in my research was the article by Caroselli. Now this is an older article done back in 1996, but I thought that it was still fitting, especially for the concepts that I'm trying to talk about today. Basically, they did a survey at 2 hospitals. Hospital A, the nurse manager had no financial or budgeting responsibility, while Hospital B, nurse managers did budget for their unit. The managers at Hospital B received monthly expense variance reports, and then only one manager at Hospital A could receive a basic financial report, and that was only upon request. They did a survey of staff nurses at both hospitals and found that they only had a basic understanding of healthcare economics. They basically gave them like a short quiz and they got about 50% right. And that was pretty even between both hospitals. Then they also asked the nurse managers to take this quiz as well. And they did score slightly higher. They scored about a 75 to 80%. So basically this suggests that budgetary and financial awareness education is necessary to meet financial goals. By increasing awareness, it can decrease costs and maximize budgets. Involving your staff and giving staff incentives can encourage those cost savings as well. The more people we have on board and that buy into what our goals are, the more likely we are to achieve them. So here's a short video to compare zero-based budgeting and incremental traditional budgeting. I guess the link does not work. So we will move on. So in conclusion, budgeting and managing fiscal resources is a multifactorial and necessary for a functioning nursing unit. Additional information. So here I just have some budgeting vocabulary terms that I wasn't able to fit into my PowerPoint earlier on that do definitely fit into this chapter. First is cost centers. A department or other unit within an organization to which costs may be charged in accounting purposes. A revenue center. A revenue center is a division that gains revenue from products or sales or service provided. Profit centers. Part of a business which is expected to make an identifiable contribution to the organization's profits. And finally, an investment center. A business unit in a firm that can utilize capital to contribute directly to a company's profitability. So at any given time, various nursing units can be any of these centers, depending on how they function. Thank you for listening to my presentation on budgeting and managing fiscal resources. And then here are my references. Thank you.